Test 1, 2, 3. Test 1, 2, 3. Test 1, 2, 3. Test 1, 2, 3.
Testing, 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 1, 2, 3, testing.
Test.
Yeah, that's larger number one. Lighting and cameras and. Say where.
I wasn't gonna say it, Tim, but Baker thing.
That I'm not surprised.
She was watching.
It was good sitting with you. Yes, ma'am.
Good afternoon, Vicky Cavazos.
Good afternoon, Vicky. Thank you.
Is that for you? That's okay. I mean, when I get them, I always make my notes on them.
Good afternoon.
And I won't remember now, but it's.
Good morning. Hello. 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 Good morning. Oh, no, we're afternoon, aren't we? Good afternoon. I'm still admitting some folks here into the Zoom. Are we ready to begin? Okay, I'm going to begin recording.
Recording in progress.
The Board of Commissioners or its committee may hold a closed meeting pursuant to Texas Government Code 551071076 for consultation concerning attorney-client matters, real estate litigation, personnel, and security matters. The Board or committees reserves the right to enter into closed meeting at any time during the course of the meeting. Now we're on to public comment, and I understand that there are a few people.
There, if I could go ahead and just run through the commissioner roll call real quick,
Okay,
and then we'll call the individuals.
that's fine.
Chair Achal Guzman,
Present?
Hoffman. Commissioner Gilbert Casillas,
Present.
Commissioner Dalia Contreras, Commissioner Lauren D. Commissioner Gabriel Lopez,
Here.
Commissioner Ignacio Perez,
Here.
Doug Polnick, Board of Commissioner Attorney,
I'm here.
President and CEO Ed Hinojosa Jr.
I'm here.
Chair Guzman, you did call the meeting to order. I'm going to go ahead and call off the first person. That is actually for citizens to be heard.
Joanne,
Yes.
before we move on, I'd like to take a personal privilege and ask for a moment of silence for the victims of Uvalde, for the children who lost their lives, and the 2 teachers.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. The first name is Edward Ocampo.
Good afternoon, all. My name is Edward Ocampo. I'm an ex-LULAC Council President of Council 22042, and as well as a Saha Mirasol Board of Commissioners, this very same commission, back in 2007, appointed to this commission as a lease to purchase homeowner. However, my lungs collapsed, and my heart began to fail, and I almost died, so I wasn't able to participate. Also an ex-agent for the city of San Antonio, appointed by Mayor Phil Harburger in 2007, seconded by Delicia Herrera. I was never availed, however, an attorney and/or a right to privacy and/or protection as an agent for the city. City ethics would state such. I have now been poisoned by arsenic in San Antonio Housing Authority Section 8 related properties, total of 13 times in 8 different properties and 2 different cities, San Antonio, Texas, and New Braunfels, Texas. My pet was killed in the very beginning, March 19, 2014, in Joaquin Castro's district. He has yet to assist me in any way, shape, or form, yet he did assist multiple people of whom I represented back in the day. Praising God for this very moment to be able to stand before you today, abandoned by each organization of which I've mentioned, LULAC, San Antonio Mirasol Board of Commissioners, and City Hall. I humbly ask for restitution regarding said toxic exposures. Former residents of which I have represented have each received in excess of $168,000. This is back in 2007. And $168,000 in a home, I received death threats. And all I can say is that it's been a complete and total misery. They have taken its toll, the arsenic exposures have, and I've been told presently that I may be on my way out. My lungs, my chest, my heart, my body in and of itself is giving out to said toxins, as they will ravage your body and then cause a grueling and punishing death. All I can say is that it was an honor to speak up on behalf of the citizens at Mirasol, all of which, there was a total of 34 people that are now deceased from that property, of which Saha is presently rebuilding on. I had the pleasure of speaking to City Hall and asking them to stop the build because the property is still toxic. I never got the opportunity to be repaid for any kind of services of which I have given to the city, and the state of Texas would state I am the first and only person to be poisoned as such, and they find this absolutely insane, for lack of a better word. Thank you so very much. I'm Edward Ocampo.
The next name on the list is Maureen Galindo.
May we add people to the list who relate? I know that there's some authority here.
So we have local rules for these things, and it's at the prerogative of the board, but everyone else has been required to follow the same rules.
Understood.
I think that we would like, I personally think that it would be a good idea to listen to as many people as want to speak,
I think so too. Did you guys want to sign up?
whether they are here on time or late. It's not a good thing to start, but it would be. So the two persons that just came in, after she's finished, you may speak if you want. Go ahead.
Saha demolishes an affordable daycare center downtown. My name's Maureen Galindo. I'm a Lavaca resident, a Saha tenant, a former parent at Labor Street Daycare Center, a community psychologist, and a marriage and family therapist in training. To say disgusted is an understatement. When I signed up earlier, I saw that the item was on the agenda, and I thought, cool, we can save the daycare. I got called and said that was a mistake, and I thought, all right, that sucks, but cool, I get to say how I really feel. This entire commission is selected by the mayor to just do whatever they tell you to do. I see it as a circus and pony show. How could you approve the demolition of the last affordable childcare downtown? To do that, I have to assume that you have zero understanding of what it's like to be a parent in this economy, how difficult it is to find childcare. I think about the contract that went through. Oh, it already passed. There's nothing that we can do. That makes me think of 333 years ago, when white men first came onto this land. It took them 17 years before they showed a piece of paper and said, oh, this is ours now, by the way. We love the water. We love that you guys know how to farm it. You guys are our slaves now, and we're in control of the land. That's what I think about when I see Timothy Alcott outside of my apartment complex taking my baseball field and my friend's basketball court and my daycare center. I've gone down to the daycare center and talked to the parents. They are horrified that our Saha Commission would approve the demolition of their family's security. How does this, in your guys' minds, when you approved that, support the families of San Antonio? You put Austin developers before San Antonio families. Shame on you. I mean that. I mean what the devil looks like incarnate in human form is taking childcare away from families. You want to talk about mental health? You want to talk about children? Do you know the kind of trauma families go through when they don't have childcare? I do. I'm a single mom of 3 kids. It's been a really hell of 5 years. I have a 5-year-old. How difficult it is to survive without affordable childcare. And you guys would take that away from so many families across the entire city. Go to that child care center. Shame of yourselves. I hope that you feel their trauma every single night when you go to sleep. That they can't sleep. I know what that's like to fall asleep scared, not being able to, so full of stress, not knowing how I'm going to survive the next day. You did that to every single family that you took their child care away. Live with that forever. And this guy should be fired for being such a
Is there another person that would like to speak? Seeing none, we'll go on with our agenda. So we're going to go on to the minutes. Do I hear approval of the May 4th, 2022 regular board meeting minutes?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
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 Same sign opposed. Approval of the May 18th Finance Committee meeting and Operations and Real Estate Committee meeting minutes. Do I hear a motion?
I so move.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those against, same sign. We will go on to the consent agenda.
Madam Chair,
Yes,
I'd like to request that items 8, which is our budget, and 14 and 15, which are development items, be pulled for further discussion after the consent agenda.
okay, so it's item 13, and what is the other item?
Pardon me, it's item 8, and then items 14 and 15.
Okay, so if you will remove 8, 13, 14,
No, 14 and 15.
14, 15, not 13.
So are you moving that from the consent agenda?
Yes, we're removing it, and we'll talk to
So-
them specifically.
So I'll make a motion that we approve, without, if there are no discussion items, I'll make a motion to approve consent items 5, 6, 7, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, and 16.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
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 All those against, same sign. Consent agenda passed. So should we, are we ready to deal with item number 8, Ed?
Yes.
Okay.
Pull up the presentation.
Okay.
Pull up the presentation here.
No, he was here. He was here.
Hello.
Sir,
Who is the chairman?
I'm the chair,
Okay.
and
the speaker-
we are now dealing with the consent
I understand you have an
items.
agenda and you follow the agenda, but
Yes.
our speaker went out, left for the restroom, now he's back. Can you make an exception so he can speak for the community here? Mr. Frank Valdez is here.
Yes, we will make another exception.
Thank you, ma'am.
Who will speak? Will they go up to the microphone, please?
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, sir.
My name is Pancho Valdez. I live at the Marie McGuire Apartments downtown. I've been a Saha tenant for over 7 years, and I can tell you the things I've seen are not to my satisfaction. Seen racism, a lot of favoritism, and in my building, we have a card-carrying member of the Ku Klux Klan that refers to black people with the N-word. He has pulled a knife on another tenant. He has slapped his former girlfriend. These are all activities that could lead to eviction, yet he's still there. We'd like to know why. Rumor has it that he's Saha's, how can I say, snitch? Well, maybe so. But the man is dangerous, and a lot of people are actually afraid of him. We'd like that issue resolved, and resolved as soon as possible. I thank you for your time.
Thank you for making us aware of this, Mr. Valdez.
Madam Chair, if I may, I wasn't wearing my reading glasses, so I said item 8, and it's really item 6. The budget is item 6, so I made an error there. So that's, the budget is what the item we'd like to pull.
Okay.
And 8 is part of the consent agenda.
No problem. Are we ready to go over item 6 in the presentation? Okay.
Yes, we are.
Good afternoon. So item 6 is our budget for our fiscal year 2023 operating budget. So we went through this during the Finance Committee meeting. We also went through it with Commissioner Kaufman. Thank you very much for taking your time for working with us on that. I want to take a minute to introduce my budget team. Jennifer Mireles is our budget manager. She was unable to be with us today. She's ill. But Priscilla Segovia is here. She's our very, very talented budget person who does much of the work on the budget. So our budget timeline begins in October, and we start with staffing plans, and it progresses through the managers and the department heads, and each of those submit budgets for their director's review. Then each department head and then prepares a business plan with goals and accomplishments, and those have to be consistent with the strategic plan. Mm-hmm. And then the budget team works with the CFO and then meets with each department head and officer to review each of their budgets. And then finally, it all gets wrapped up and we present it to the CEO. So today we're going to review the budget on both a consolidated level as well as the line of budget level. And but your budget packets contain a lot more information than that. So if you have any questions on any of that stuff, you can ask those questions as well. So you have a budget in your packet for each operating property, each grant, and each department. So Ed, Brandy, and myself are going to go through the presentation, and so I'll turn it over to Ed to start.
So here we just have some of the SAHA and partner accomplishments over the last year, and I won't go through all of them, but I did want to highlight a few. So we have adopted new organizational values of equity, compassion, and excellence. We've continued to expand the public housing and Beacon Wi-Fi project. We received $1 million congressional earmark, so we were happy for that from Congressman Castro, and that's for Wi-Fi. We hired a master planner for both Alazan and Lincoln, so their work is underway. We've started staff training on equity and trauma-informed care. We received an even larger FSS and Ross grant for service workers than we've received in the past. We were awarded emergency housing vouchers to deal with the COVID situation, and we were successful in getting those issued. We reopened the HCV waiting list in September, and we worked with the city and others to support the 2022 bond, and that was, as you know, approved in May of this year, last month. So these are some of the things that we've been working on. And the last thing I'll point out is we've been working to rebuild relationships with the community. So these are some of the things we've been working on over the last year, and we just wanted to point out some of the accomplishments prior to starting the budget. So with that, I'll turn it over to Brandy.
Ed, let me just get, if you will go back what does that mean to converted several partnership properties to Beacon ownership? What does that mean?
So at the end of 15 years, we have an option to buy the property and bring it back into our complete ownership. Prior to that, during the 15-year period, we're generally a 1% partner in the transaction.
Okay.
And we have options at the end of the period to buy the property. And bringing it back into our portfolio enables us to either lower rents or target a lower income group. And so those are properties we brought into our portfolio. We're also looking at ways that we can convert some of those apartments into public housing in order to continue build our public housing inventory.
Okay. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. As y'all probably have seen a couple of times, our mission is to improve the lives of our residents, providing quality, affordable, and building sustainable, thriving communities. So as we continue to honor that mission statement, we look at our strategic plan outcomes, and that's it's a start of how our budget is built. And so some of our staff focus outcomes have been related to respect, value, and diversity and inclusion, and ensuring our staff thrive at work. Our resident focus outcomes have been around sufficient housing choices, quality housing, feel safe, and affordable utilities. So we've been doing a lot of work around there, and we'll continue to do a lot of work going into this next fiscal year. So what we do, we have obviously 10% of that rental market, and so we are not just landlords when we talk about public housing or Beacon, but we also are providing subsidies to private landlords within our community that are housing our Section 8 families. We have roughly about 6,000 public housing homes and 3,900 Beacon homes, as well as we have 4,800 partnerships and 13,700 assisted housing vouchers, so our housing choice voucher. And the biggest number out there is that roughly about 62,000 families that we're serving every day, and about 2,000 families are currently enrolled in receiving services through our community development initiatives programs.
Brandy, the assisted housing vouchers are utilized in the Beacon and in the public housing homes or not?
So those are our Section 8 programs, and so we do have some vouchers, families that live in our Beacon communities. They don't live in public housing because HUD does not allow that, but we do have them at our Beacon communities as well as our partnerships. So just to remind the board, that's a great question, that anytime we are entering into partnerships, one of the key criteria is that they must accept the Section 8 vouchers. So we want to make sure that our voucher holders have choices, not just centralized, but anywhere in San Antonio. And if you're partnering with us, you will accept those vouchers as well.
So those 13,000 families can go anywhere. They can go to a private landlord, or in some cases, they choose one of our properties, which is a Beacon community, or a partnership, but they can go anywhere.
And how do you differentiate Beacon from partnership homes?
So Beacon is the portfolio that we own. So we own the property, we manage it, and we run it. The partnerships are new developments generally that we've entered into deals with third-party developers, and generally we own 1% or less than 1% of those, and at the end of the 15 years, we're able to buy them and convert them over to our own portfolio.
All right, thank you.
So also to add to that, Dr. Guzman, we also have roughly about 700 of our Housing Choice Voucher Program families living in our Beacon community. So we do have a large number in our Beacon communities.
Well, that makes sense. Yeah.
So who we serve, so we wanted to break it down to our two federal programs, so for public housing and the voucher program. So here the number is about 17,500 households that we're serving. 47% of those, 47% are children. So we know that we have a lot of children and that we are serving throughout our both programs. The average size is about 2.5, so I always like to say 3 because we don't have a half a child. And then our median income is roughly about $9,900 a year. And so I wanted to kind of put that in perspective for everybody. And so The AMI categories for a three-person family right now that just got released earlier this year is roughly about $23,000. So when we look at AMI and we're talking about 30%, that's $23,000 is what the federal level is. But you can see we're serving, our families are roughly around the $9,900, so well below that 30% AMI. We do have 52% of our families on fixed income, so receiving SS or SSI benefits, and 31% of our families are actually that are earning income. And so roughly the 52% makes up of our demographics, because we know we do have roughly about 50% of older adults and are disabled, and the other 50% are our families.
So let me just add on that page, Brandy, before you continue. Brandy pointed out that the income level for a 30% family is about $23,000. That means that the tax credit units that are 30% units, the rent is about $500, a little over $500 a month. There's no way our families that are earning less than $10,000 a year can afford $500 a month. So that's why we continue to focus on income-based rent calculations and either public housing or Section 8. And citywide, other entities are also focusing on 30%, but there's so few units created that they're not addressing the needs of our wait list. So I just wanted to point that out in addition to the comments Brandy made.
Thank you, Ed. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it back over to the federal funding trend to Diana.
Thanks, Brandy. So this federal funding trend shows you our 4 major programs that are funded by HUD. We give you information from 2019 to projected 2022. These are presented in a calendar year. HUD funds us in a calendar year, although our fiscal year runs from July 1 to June 30th. So for the first column, that's our public housing subsidy. So just a little bit of background there. HUD determines what each asset management project, that's their terminology, that's just a grouping of projects, different grouping of properties that we have. They determine your project expense level. Those are typically around $500, and that includes utility allowance. So if you take your tenant rent, which is about an average of $150, HUD funds us at about $350 per unit per month. So that's generally, that's an oversimplification, but that's how subsidy works. So our public housing subsidy, you can see, is pretty consistent for 19 and 20, and when you get to 21, there's a pretty significant increase of a couple of $1 million. And that comes from an energy performance contract that we entered into, and HUD gives you a subsidy basically to save utilities, right? Because they reimburse you for utilities all the way down the line. So investing up front into energy saving devices saves them money, so they give you a little bit of a bump. So that's a little bit of a bump that we got in 21. Also in 21, because of the way the calculation works, they use older information on what the average tenant rent is, so they typically apply an inflationary factor. Well, in 2021, due to COVID, they applied, this is the first time I've ever seen this, by the way, a deflationary factor to that number. So it had the effect of increasing our subsidy from them. So that was good news for 21. Well, what they did in 22 was they re-implemented an inflationary factor, and they applied about 4.5% to the average tenant rent, and we all know that did not happen, right? That is not reality. Tenants are not paying 4.5% more than they were before COVID. So the only good news here is that possibly there's a possibility that they would increase the proration of how they fund us. So they do this whole calculation, and then they come out at the end and they say, okay, well, this is what we think it's going to cost you to run the program, and then they apply a proration that's lower than 100%. So they've been funding us at about 97% recently. The only thing we can hope for is, on the next page, I'll cover the actual HUD budget, and there may be some upside there, is that they can increase the proration above 100%. And we're sort of waiting on that. We haven't heard that yet, but it could happen. So the next type of funding is our Public Housing Capital Fund, and we use that for improvements or repairs to our public housing properties. Typically, these are larger capital items. You can see it's been consistently funded at $13 million. A couple of weeks ago, we were notified that we are being funded at $16.2 million for '22. So it's really good news. It's a $3 million increase. That is a 22% increase in funding, which is actually higher than what you're going to see on the next page, which was what the HUD budget went up by only 15.7%. So that was all just great news. Section 8 admin fee, also a pretty good inflationary factor this year. I've never seen this either. They applied a 6.5% inflationary factor to the administrative fees. The administrative fees are used by the Section 8 staff to operate the program, to do the research, to do all of the stuff with the landlords, all of the paperwork stuff. And so that's being funded at $10.6 million. The last column there shows our Housing Choice Voucher HAP funding, and we projected about a 2% increase because we had not received any information at the time of publishing this slide. But at this point, a few weeks ago, we were notified that we were going to be funded at about $115.5 million, which is another significant increase. The increase is just below 4%. So they applied a much better inflationary factor to '22 than they had in the past. So that's all pretty good news from HUD. Next slide. I'm sorry. So this is the federal funding update. In '22, we actually saw a Consolidated Appropriations Act. Typically, we see a lot of continuing resolutions funding HUD, but this year we actually got a budget, and there were some pretty good increases in each one. So for tenant-based rental assistance, which is the affordable housing, which is a Section 8, there was a 4.4% increase in the Housing Choice Voucher renewals. We did only see a 3.84% increase, so the rest of it must be for other types of funding. And then the capital fund, you could see that there was a 15.7% increase, but we saw better than that increase when they gave us our funding for '22 at a 22% increase. The public housing operating subsidies, you could see there that there's a $200 million increase over the '21 level, which is a 4.1% increase. Now, we did see the decrease in our funding itself, but what we're hoping is that HUD will raise the proration to above 100%, and we should get a few more dollars out of that. So unfortunately, we won't know that until about October of '22. So when they fund you for a calendar year, they fund you on what they continuously call them interim prorations, and then they won't give you a final proration until October of the actual calendar year. So it takes them a long time to figure out how much money they actually have. So we're hoping for better than that. The project-based rental assistance did have a 3.9% increase. Again, we operate several of these properties within our Beacon portfolio. They have a Section 8 program that doesn't move. They're project-based, so the units are stuck they remain with the property itself. So that increase, the funding increase was 3.9%, but we've only renewed one of those contracts this year, and we renewed it at about a 2% increase. So we didn't see that 3.9% in our individual properties at this point. There was some increase of $150 million for the Choice Neighborhood Grant, which is a highly competitive grant. There was an increase in the Home Investment Partnership Program. So we don't directly receive home funds, but the city of San Antonio does, and I'm sure you've heard in some of Tim's presentations that the city will provide us with home funds periodically for our partnership developments. So that's good news that there's an increase there. And then there was an increase to homeless assistance grants, which is just great for the community. So this slide gives you a history of our HAP by calendar year. You could see that there was something of a bump there in 2018. There was almost a 5% increase. That's when the Section 8 staff implemented the small area FMRs, the SAFMRs, and so that increased our average HAP a little bit. And then you could see it's been consistent at about 2% a year until 2021, which it dropped pretty significantly. And that was related to basically COVID and people just really not moving and landlords not raising rents significantly due to COVID. 2022, you'll see we'll back up a projected increase of a little over 2.5%. Our average HAP projected cost is $665 per unit, but our HAP funding is $656 per unit. So there's about a $9 delta per unit per month on that. So this is our consolidated revenue by line of business. So you could see that the largest line of business that per dollars is our Section 8 program, and their projected expenses are, revenue is $115.3 million, public housing, $40 million, Beacon, about $38.5 million, real estate services, $7.5 million, community initiatives, $2 million, capital funds, $16.5 million, and central office, $300,000. Next slide. So this is our consolidated revenue by type. So you can see that HAP is the largest of our revenue, is $105 million. Rental revenue is $46.3 million. Operating subsidy, almost $28 million. Capital grant, $16.5. Section 8 admin at about $10 million. Miscellaneous revenue at $8.2 million. Other grants, which are CDI grants and some of those Beacon grants, at about $5.5 million, and an interest income at $1.2 million. So then this is our consolidated expenses, and again, this is by line of business. There's $113 million worth of expenses in Section 8, $40 million in public housing, $34 for Beacon, capital funds at about $14 million, central office at $12.3 million, community initiatives $4.4 million, and real estate services at $3.7. Now these are our expenses by type, by budget line item or type of expense. And again, HAP being our largest expense at almost $105 million, salaries at about $49 million, maintenance $20 million, and that's both a Beacon and Beacon and public housing portfolios. Capital grant, that's our transfers to public housing, so that once you complete the improvement or the work for the capital grant, it gets transferred to the public housing line of business. Administrative costs at about $11 million, utilities $10 million, interest expense, that's on debt service, typically that's going to be in our Beacon portfolio, and then insurance at $4.3 million. The operating subsidy line there at $3.2 million, those are our public housing units that we have within the partnerships that Brandy mentioned. So we're obligated to transfer our operating subsidy for those units to those partnerships, so that's $3.2 million. And
Diane,
yes.
the $1.4 million for protective services, what does that cover completely?
So that covers the actual on-site contracted services. That wouldn't include like the security department and all of the work that they do.
So that's like the contract with Blue Armor and,
yes.
and
Yes, sir.
those
So,
people.
so I'd like to add also that during COVID, we got extra funds from HUD. So we were able to provide 24-hour security at our senior facilities. But if you exclude that, our previous budget was in the $1 million range. So we've actually increased the budget from $1 million to $1.4 million for security, in response to some of the concerns that you've raised and others have raised about security.
Thank you.
So this slide shows our operating budget by line of business. And so we presented it here the same way we present the quarterly financial report. So the 5 columns on the left are our housing and support lines of business. So public housing, Section 8, Beacon being a direct service, central office being basically the management company for those housing programs, and then the CDI being our resident services program. So if you see the bottom row there that says net surplus or deficit, I wanted to provide a comparison from one year to the next. Sorry, I have to find my right notes. So public housing is budgeted for a $4.3 million deficit, and in comparison, the 22 fiscal year was budgeted at a $2.8 million deficit. So there's a little bit of an increase there. Section 8 is budgeted at a $1.1 million deficit, and last year was budgeted at a $200,000 deficit. Beacon is budgeted at $4 million surplus. Last year was budgeted at a $4.8 million surplus. Central office is budgeted at $800,000 deficit. Last year was budgeted at a $600,000 surplus. CDI is budgeted at a $2.3 million deficit, and last year was budgeted at a $1.9 million deficit. Real estate services is budgeted at a $3.7 million surplus, and last year was budgeted at a $4.7 million surplus. So you can see overall, though, the net surplus or deficit is pretty much a balanced budget at a negative $800,000.
Include in a budget. Why would you include in a budget funding that we do not have?
Yes, so typically, those losses have been covered historically with the MTW funds.
So why aren't we moving over?
So what happens is HUD is actually underfunding the HUD programs, and because of that, we have to take our own resources to put it back into the programs to cover the balance. And I think CDI is a good example, where HUD provides for the caseworkers only salaries. It doesn't pay for any of the benefits. It doesn't pay for any telephone, computer expenses, anything of that sort. So they're forcing us to contribute some of our resources to cover the balance.
So would it make sense to have a federal budget and then a local budget that has monies allocated that we know are going to be expended?
I think that's covered on the MTW sheet that Diana's going to show us.
Right. I think we want to be transparent and not show the transfers in this format so that you understand that there is a $4.3 million operating loss in the public housing portfolio that will be covered with an MTW transfer.
Yeah, right. And see, I don't see it as a loss. It'd be interesting to see what the other commissioners say. I don't see it as a loss as much as I see it as funding not covered by the federal government, but covered by us. Because I think if many budgets that have monies coming from different sources to complete the expenditures have different rows or columns, however you call the ones that are up and down, saying this is the federal piece, this is if there is state piece, and this is the local piece, so that the board becomes aware of what we're putting into giving our funds, okay? Because I think what we also need to get at is how much money are we making? Because if we should also have goals for the amount of money that we don't want to make. Okay, and we haven't, as part of the budget, approached that yet. And I think it's important for us to understand the role of the federal government in housing, which they have tried to minimize it as much as possible, and then the role of the local and how important it is that we continue to do a good job, because we are having to fund a lot of the things that previously would have been funded by the federal government, but they're not.
Yeah.
And so having the different columns of where the monies are coming from might give us a better representation of budgeting.
Okay, we can work on that format for next year, Dr. Guzman.
Yes.
Here, we're trying to show just the HUD-funded portion,
Okay.
right?
Okay.
And there are special accounting requirements that HUD imposes, so we can't mix
Right,
other
no,
funds.
I
and,
understand that one, yes. Yeah, you don't mix it, but you proportion parts of the budget
Right.
to different cost centers.
Okay, we'll try to improve that format for next
Okay,
year.
Thank you.
And I think part of the concern was is that with this deficit, were we going to be able to cover whatever
Yeah.
losses there were?
Yeah.
Yes, so
And-
we'll cover that on the MTW uses page. So this is the Public Housing 5-Year Capital Plan, and this is actually based on the $13.2 million CFP grant that we had expected. So now that we're going to get $16.2 million, there'll be an additional $3 million that Brandy and will work with Tom Roth on to allocate to different projects. So you can see for the 22 year, we have budgeted for the operating support about 10% of the grant, administration of the program about 10% of the grant. The CFFP loan payment, you'll see there is about $2.2 million, and that finally burns off about in the middle of the 2024 grant. Then there are some money set aside for project managers and inspector salaries, architectural and engineering types of costs for about $400,000. We always put aside a few $100,000 for emergency and unscheduled repairs. That always happens every day. And then that largest line item of $5.349 million, that covers priority items 5 and 6 only from the most recent information from the P&A. And those are going to be exigent health and safety issues that have to be addressed immediately per HUD. So the good news is that the grant will cover it. And then we move on to basically trying to fill the gap with the balance of the needs from the P&A, which the capital fund will obviously never cover.
It would be good if you could make that list of priority items, that is the 5349, to the commissioners and
Yes.
to your tenants, so that they know what we're going to be doing and how that's going to make them safer. I think that would be a good list to make available.
Thank you for that suggestion. Good idea.
Yes, sir.
Dana, if you could back it up one slide,
Sure.
going through the numbers, I think for the commissioners, just because I had been a part of this before, the beacon communities that we see being the only, profitable options, just as a mindset, those are the ones when we partnered with the for-profit developers, because they'll help sustain versus the other properties that operate at net negatives that create, the maintenance, deferred maintenance and everything, right? The deferred maintenance and everything else. So that's why we have to make sure that we continue a healthy balance.
Right.
Does it fulfill exactly? No, it's not the magic bullet, but it is something that we do need to keep an eye on.
Yes.
It's those partnerships. At one point,
absolutely.
Yeah, those were the partnerships with the Franklins and the NRPs and of the world. And then they became ours. And they still operate profitably. Is that correct? Am I reading it correctly?
Yes, somewhat,
Okay.
yes.
Okay.
Of that $4 million, we have some $3.4 million worth of debt service payments, principal payments we have to make. So it does shrink because it is extremely affordable. Those units, yes.
The other part where there's some revenue that comes in, if you look at the real estate column, that's where the developer fees we earn, they go into that column as well. So that's also a positive, so.
Yes,
Good.
related to the same deals, right.
Right.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then, so in your packet, we did give you the list of the 5 and 6 priority items. So you should be able to see every single item that's going to be done with that $5.349 million. We didn't want to try to display that. It's a very long list. Okay, next slide. So this is the Beacon 5-year capital plan, and so it looks a little different than the public housing capital plan because we don't have any grants for, to cover the cost of repairs or upgrades at Beacon. So you could see that there are some loan funds in the first couple of years. The first year, the $4 million, those are loan funds that we already actually have, and that work has started. That's at the Burning Tree apartment, so that's going to be some much-needed repairs and upgrades to that apartment complex. And then the $3 million that is planned to be loaned for the 23-24 fiscal year is that for the Pecan Hill Apartments. That's an elderly project-based rental assistance property, and they have some significant needs that will be able to be addressed within their rent structure that they have that's fully paid by HUD, essentially, because they are project-based Section 8. So that's actually good news. Then you could see the next row, there's some very small items that would be paid for through operations, because those are basically below our capitalization threshold. Then the next row is what will be able to pay for out of reserves. That first item is $6 million. The lion's share of that is for the Wood Hill Apartments, and they actually do have those reserves set aside already. So they'll be doing some significant work there. Now, the last row is the unfunded items, and this is some work that is needed. As a matter of fact, the $2.4 million showing in fiscal year 22-23, part of that is kicking off already. That's at an apartment complex called Villa de Valencia, and their last physical score was a 29. So they have some significant needs there. That contract will be kicking off now, and they have obviously no funds to cover those costs, so we'll have to utilize some other reserves we have to pay for those.
So in general, let me just make sure for the board, in general, our reserves are specific to different buildings? They're not as a whole, or how do we allocate reserves in general?
So we have different types of reserves. Now, in the Beacon community, where there's properties we own, and they may have loans on that particular property, or bonds that we've issued for that particular property, there are specific requirements from the lender to keep the reserves attached to that property. So, and they call it either a replacement reserve, so that every month we put away money in order to make improvements at the property, or they may call it a bond reserve, or they may call it an operating reserve. But it is specifically attached to that property. We can't take it and move it somewhere else. That's for the Beacon portfolio. For Section 8 in public housing, any reserves, any excess funds go into what we call MTW reserves, and Diana will be covering that. And then there's also restricted funds of various type.
Absolutely.
If we get an insurance claim, it's restricted, and so it's actually very complex. And at some future finance committee meeting, we could go through that in more detail. If you'd like.
Sure, and we cover a lot of that in the cash report. I know it's sort of disconnected, but in the cash report, we try to identify all of those dollars that are restricted, and we try to give you enough information as to why they're restricted, like anything that's basically funded by HUD. So even in the Beacon portfolio, you have those project-based assisted properties. You can't transfer any money out of those properties no matter what.
Now, each Beacon property has their own reserve fund?
It depends on the affordability. Like some of them have none, which is why we have an unfunded row there. because the affordability just doesn't allow them to charge enough
But
rent
but whatever,
to build a
whatever
reserve.
they generate, it's theirs.
It's-
That's what
it-
he's asking.
Absolutely, and we do transfer sometimes, and we have done in the past, utilize a property that may be larger, that may generate some excess, and we've used those funds to assist other properties, right?
I think what I'm trying to get at is, like, I was in a conversation with Ed once about, like, when we take over Hemisphere in a few years, it's going to need some major rehab, and they said that there's reserve funds that are built throughout those 15 years to handle that. Is that true?
Well,
Or
you would
does it
have
come out of these monies?
You would have a replacement reserve, but if you have larger needs, typically what we would do is a refinance on the property and potentially place extra debt, because in 15 years, you've also created a lot of equity, right? So you would be able to borrow money, hopefully at a better interest rate, or the same, and then add those dollars that you would need for those upgrades, depending on whether or not you have a lockout period. And those are the ones that Tom Roth brings to you for refinancing.
So those properties, like the partnership properties, each is a little bit different, but they do have a replacement reserve that's been built. And it's per month, per unit. Every time we collect rent, we put away some dollars to make future improvements. Generally, they have some sort of operating reserve that is different in each case, and it depends on the lender requirements and at the beginning of the transaction. Some have higher amounts, some have lower amounts, depending on how much risk tolerance the lender may have. And then finally, what else? Operating reserves, right?
Affordability reserves,
yeah.
depending on the programs that are on there. And typically, by year 15, most of those are gone because they'll release them, but replacement reserves still be in place per normal lending requirements. But it depends on the needs of the property when you get it at year 15. And then the other thing too is sometimes, because of the way tax credits work, sometimes the lockout period for refinancing goes into year 16 or year 17 even sometimes. So it'll take us another couple of years to refinance.
So all of that goes to say that we have federal funds, right? So those are more limited in use, but if it's non-federal funds, some of it can be moved to other purposes, but other parts of it are committed, based on agreements we have in place with lenders, and it cannot be moved. So Diana monitors all of that really closely.
Yeah, we have so many, there's so many moving parts. I mean, I'd love to get into it with any of you if you're interested. I'd love to get in the weeds about stuff like that. But yeah, there's, and each partnership brings a new set of complexips with it. So they're always coming up with something new. Okay, so
That's
next.
job security.
Thank you. I'm not really looking for that. So, sources and getting to that age. So sources and uses of MTW funds. So what you typically see is just that first row up there, which is our HUD-held funds, and we project that out through the end of the fiscal year. We projected that at $62 million. The next three rows there came from the HUD MTW group. They have mandated that we do a prescribed calculation on the dollars we have in those three MTW programs, so public housing, housing choice voucher, and housing choice voucher admin funds. The other MTW program is the CFP, but that being a cost reimbursement grant, there's no cash, right? So they provided us with a calculation, and they said, you have to include not just the money HUD is holding in this calculation, but you have to tell us what you have on hand based on this calculation. So you could see that the largest number there is the public housing operating funds, of which we have $4.2 million according to their calculation. But that essentially covers 1 month of operating reserve for public housing. So obviously, any reasonable organization would try to keep that right for reserves. So we need to be able to set those aside for reserves just for the operations of the program. You could see that the amount of funds we have available for HAP funds is $1.1 million, and our HAP expenses is around $8 or $9 million depending on the month. So that's not covering anything. But they did require us to include that this year, so you'll see that from now on. So we have available to us total $67.6 million. So yes, ma'am.
I think that the requirement was to better understand what funding the individual housing authorities have at their command.
Yeah, I think they believe that we have a lot more reserves than we do.
Yeah,
Yes, ma'am.
that's what I think they were
Yes,
after
ma'am.
too, yeah.
Right, because no one would think that $4 million on
Right.
over 6,000 public housing units is an unreasonable operating reserve.
Right,
Right,
right, but there may be others that have been stowing away
absolutely.
and they may take it back. I mean, I've seen that happen,
Yeah, we don't want that.
yeah.
So the first four uses are going to be the operating losses that you saw in the budget. So Section 8, $1.1 million, public housing, $4.3 million, resident services at $2.3 million, and central office at $800,000. So again, those are going to be those transfers that we're going to make to support those federal programs. So then for the other uses, we have the largest amount going to the Alazan pre-development and development costs at almost $35 million. Then we have investment in tax credit and Beacon properties for upgrades of $5 million. Then we have the Snowden Road development at a max $8.5 million. Pre-development costs for Lincoln at $2 million. Preservation of affordable housing at $5 million, and that goes back to that Beacon 5-year plan of the unfunded dollars that are needed at some of the Beacon properties. Then we have an opportunity that Brandy and Ed have been working on with the Bezos Academy to provide some child care centers on our public housing properties, and that is $3 million. And then we have the Wi-Fi service for public housing, for the service only, of $1 million. All the infrastructure should be done by the end of this fiscal year. And so that provides equal uses and to sources.
So if I could just talk about the Bezos Academy for a minute. We've already had, I think, 3 or 4 meetings with them, and they're very excited about the possibility of putting in preschool near some of our facilities. So they're planning their second in-person meeting next week to actually tour a facility on the east side that we have that is vacant, that they are considering using it for a daycare center. But basically, we would make the improvements to the building, and they would provide the teachers, they would provide the curriculum, they would provide the meals for the kids. It would be 3 meals. And so this is an exciting opportunity that we've been working on.
I'm sorry, Ed, did you say it's an existing property or?
It is, we call it the old sheriff's building. It's on Garcia Street on the east side. And years ago, apparently the sheriff's department used to use it as a substation. It's now vacant. So it's an office building that could be converted over to a preschool. For Bezos, for our residents and others in the community. So we've allocated $3 million for that. It's a multi-year project. The first year, we think may be close to $1 million, and then we would consider going on with the phase 2 and phase 3. They're committed to coming to San Antonio, and so we're continuing to have the discussion with them. They'll be back in next week.
That's good.
Next slide. Okay, so this is our personnel count. Our current fiscal year, we have 647 positions. The budgeted positions for 2023 would be 670 for a 23 net increase. You can see for public housing, there's an increase of 5, and those were some operational needs that Brandy and her staff have identified that needed to be on the public housing sites. Community Development Initiatives, so again, that's our resident services. That's increases for resident services as well as the Jobs Plus grant, the larger Jobs Plus grant. The Beacon Community, that 19 personnel decrease is not really a decrease in personnel, it's a decrease of the 3 properties that we had expected to come on this year that did not come on. Okay, so then property management, there's an increase of a net 18, 3 of them over the Beacon portfolio, 5 of them over the public housing portfolio, and then 10 of them over the public housing waitlist management, of which 9 of them were just transitional, they were just transferred personnel count, and then they added 1 additional there to property management. So those 10, they show up in the property management count, but they actually get charged to the properties, because what they do is they actually manage the public housing wait list. Then the central office additions, there are 12 total. I'm sorry, I'm going to have to look at my notes here. So we have 1 additional person in asset management because they are taking on a significant number of new partnership units. There is a senior crime analyst being added for security. There's an assistant director for HR. There is a training coordinator for HR. There's an assistant director in public affairs. There's an assistant director in policy and planning. There is a new equity, diversity, and inclusion director position also being added to policy and planning. And then there's a strategic senior manager for policy and planning. And then there's a couple of support positions for IT that are necessary. And finally, 1 additional compliance analyst for regulatory oversight. That's a total of 12 positions there.
I'm sorry, did you say that was, those are unfilled currently or additional?
Well, these would all be unfilled other than the assistant director of HR, because these are new positions that are proposed for starting July 1st. Yes, sir. And
Do we have 112 people working in this office?
I'm sorry?
Do we have 112 people working in this office?
In this building? I believe so.
Seems pretty empty all the time.
This is a big office. I found out the other day. There's a lot of rooms.
Commissioner, we're usually only in here and there, so.
Well, I've walked through the building though, and it's quite empty.
Some of the administrative people are on hybrid, but also recall Brandy and HR keep reminding me, we still have a lot of vacancies in, throughout the organization, so some of it is that as well.
Yes, significant. I mean, yes. And I think Ayana covers that during the Ops Committee.
And that's, that's something that concerns me, is when an organization has positions that are unfilled, clearly they're overworking, but we really don't know how those would be working if all the positions were filled, and yet we're wanting to add to the budget some 23 new. And so I think that you need to look at what ratio of the budget you would be spending in personnel if you fully staff up and you add these, and then is that within what HUD feels comfortable with, or what other housing authorities have? Because what you're really talking about is adding another 35 or 40 people, given the the unfilled positions plus a new 23 positions. And so that seems to me like a lot of positions. And so I would take that slowly and carefully.
Yeah, so many of the positions are because we're bringing new properties on to our portfolio. So
Okay.
those are not our employees today, and then they would become our employees as we bring the properties in. So if you look here at Beacon, actually, we're down in Beacon, but we're up in public housing, property management, 18 employees. So that's direct service related to our properties and to our residents. So those are positions we felt were really necessary. Some of the other positions that Diana mentioned are upgrades of positions. So it may be that a department has a senior analyst and they're upgrading to an assistant director or something of that sort. So it's not a direct increase in our dollars, it's a change in the type of position we have in some departments. So, and that's not reflected it's reflected as an addition because it's a new position, but it's not reflected in the dollars because it's...
Because you didn't take out the other one.
Right.
Okay. Well, that would be interesting to see because that definitely impacts the budget.
Right. So we are watching that closely. Obviously, we don't want to overspend. One of the things I know we do is compare ourselves to other housing authorities as far as the workload per caseworker or the number of maintenance workers we have per property, number of units and things like that.
Yes.
So those are comparisons we do.
Okay. Thank you.
And then the last slide. So that's our organizational structure, and there's not been essentially any change to that.
Right, and this concludes the budget presentation, but this is that high-level organization structure.
So Ed, I know that you had asked item 8 be pulled, but it meant this was item 6. So can we go ahead and have the board vote on item 8 now, just so that we're
Yes.
back on course? Is that okay, or are you done with that?
We are done with presenting this item. If there's no further questions from the board, we'll need a vote on both items 6 and 8.
I just have one more suggestion, and that is when you show us the organizational plan, if you would put the names of the people who are holding those positions, that would give us a better picture of who's doing what.
I know Priscilla's staring at me in the back right now because she had them on there, and I told her it looked too busy to take them off. So I know she's staring a hole in me right now.
She's sending you an arrow.
Diane, I would like to make an appointment with you to sit down and go over this a little more, so I'll have a better understanding of the budget for next year and the individual item, go more into depth than what was presented here, and so I have a better understanding.
Sure.
I'm not a CFO or a CPA, so...
We have, 200 entities that...
We have over 200 different business units, so but we'll try to stick to...
There's a lot of detail. Yeah.
Right, I may not want to see
200.
everything, but there's some specific areas that I have concerns with.
There's a lot of information in your packet that we could go through and walk through a lot of that information.
Thank you, Diane.
Sure.
With no other comments, Chair, I'll make a motion to, that we approve item 6, the budget, and then item 8, since I initially had removed it.
Is there a second? Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those against, same sign. Budget passed, Mr. Ed.
Thank you.
So onwards we go.
So we have items number 14 and 15.
There you go. Mr. Tim.
Yes, and earlier, a few minutes ago, Chairwoman, you mentioned who actually is doing the work. I'll introduce Tom Roth, and we have Martina Hinojosa, who's one of our bond counsel, who actually worked on these two transactions. So you can see who actually is doing the hard work around here on this transaction. It's not me. So, but I will go through this. Items 14 and 15 are related items, and I presented this at the previous committee meeting. And there's one change, which is why we pulled it to discuss it again. But Sorrento Apartments, which is one of those two items, was something we brought to the board last year, and it was one of the properties that we were going to divest our interest in because of certain issues we have with that piece of property. And the board approved last September, it was actually September 23rd, 2021, that we would put that property, we put it up for sale, and then the buyer was Fairfield. And they said, hey, we're going to buy this piece of property. We'd like for you to stay in it because we'd like to put bonds on it, and we'd get that tax exemption, and we'd continue the affordability. And then they said, you know what, we actually have another property we're buying in San Antonio called Bethel. Would you like to be in that property as well? And that's the other agenda item. And so the board approved both those transactions last September. And now what the reason we brought it back to you today is actually to approve those business terms that we had discussed. And the reason it's on the agenda today is because on the resolution, it has that the bond maturity date as being December 31st, 2042, and it should be July 1st, 2056. And so the reason that maturity, so that's the only change, but the reason that is that since that we went to the committee meeting, you know, Tom and has had conversations with Fairfield, and they're worried about the interest rates going up, and they thought a longer maturity date on the bonds when when they get debt on them as permanent debt, that the interest rate may be higher for a shorter term. And so they're just trying to make sure that the deal pencils financially. So a longer term, typically you have a 30-year mortgage, the interest rate may be, I guess, shorter, less. Your payments will be less. Let me say it different. Your payments will be less for a longer term than a shorter term. And so that's the reason for the change, is so the payments would be less. I misspoke there. And Tom's here for any tough questions on the financing.
But then we're spending more over the 30 years than we would, and if we have monies, why would we want to lengthen that and not utilize the funds that we have at no interest rate?
So this is not our property, it would be a partnership, so we would only be a 1% holder.
Okay.
We're just issuing the bonds.
So we're not putting any money into the transaction. The bonds just flow through one of our entities. They're at no risk to us because the property is actually the security for the transaction. So we're not putting any money into the transaction.
This, Tim and Tom, correct me if I'm wrong, this will allow that developer, whoever we're going to partner with, it gives them better cash control.
Right.
Now, yeah, you're right. They'll be
Yeah.
paying more, but that's on them. And they eventually might sell the property later anyways. But it doesn't necessarily,
But whenever you pay more, you just push it towards the individuals. I mean, right, Tom?
We would still be getting the development fee, just like on any other deal. We'll still have the option to purchase the asset at the end of the 15-year
At the 15-year.
compliance period. And typically, that's when, as Ed was saying earlier, that's when we would typically refinance.
Right.
To hopefully lower the interest rate or put money back into the property. And at that time, we could probably make more affordable units, you know, instead of saying having majority at 60% AMI, we could lower it or put public housing units when we control all ownership interests of the property, then we don't have to.
But if they're taking out a 30-year loan, would we be able to take over that loan?
Yes, we would just be
Okay,
buying the
instead of,
partnership. So all
okay.
we acquire the partnership interest.
Okay.
So in fact, we own 100% of the
Okay.
asset.
Okay.
And then we can do whatever's, you know, economically feasible at that time.
Yeah. Above and beyond the existing loan. Okay. Okay.
So Tim, does that cover item 14?
Both, 14 and 15.
Okay.
It's the same change to the date on both items.
make a motion. I'll make the motion to approve consent items 14 and 15.
I'll second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those against, same sign. Motion's pass. We move on to item 16, consideration and approval of Resolution 6250, authorizing President and CEO to
I think we're on
renew-
number 17, ma'am.
17.
16 was approved
That was the
already, so we
consent.
can go to
Okay,
17.
oh, that's right, that's in the consent agenda. Okay, so individual items, consideration of 6241, the Snowden apartment transaction.
And that would be I. And we have a PowerPoint on this one. And this one also we presented at the committee meeting. And so you'll see that Snowden Road is one of the properties in orange there towards the middle. And so we always show that to show how it's progressing. And go ahead and go to the next slide. And Snowden Road, you'll see, it is, it's in the medical center, so near Balcones Heights. And so it's Snowden Road. And you can see what it's near in the next slide. And so let me go through this development. The reason this development, and the board should be excited about it, is because it was a 9% tax credits, and as the board knows, those are the very competitive ones and very hard to get. What is unique about this from our perspective is that the role that Saha has played is that it's being self-developed by Saha. So we're, certainly we have tax credit investors, but we don't have a for-profit developer partner like we typically have with NRP or Franklin or a different group. And this is a senior development. You'll see the income mix, and we can certainly present this differently if you like, but it's 135 units. And what we did was, you'll see it says note 40% or 54 of the units are subsidized by MTW program. And what that means is that we're putting essentially project-based vouchers on the units. And so that will serve our wait list, and who is typically folks that are making 0 to 15% AMI. And so when you add up those 54 units, and you can go back to the previous slide, but you add up the 54 units with the 14 at 30% AMI, you'll see half the development will be serving people that are 0 to 15% AMI. That is a very difficult group to serve. This is a great testament to this board's leadership and Ed's leadership, to really focus on the people that are at that lower income bracket. And I got to give kudos also to Lorraine Robles and Baker Tilly as well, who did a lot of work on this. Self-development is a lot more effort. So you might be doing less deals, but you're able to get some like this that is they're very deeply affordable. And so we got very good pricing, on the tax credits. It was 92.5 cents. And as Diana mentioned in her presentation, we have $8.5 million worth of funding that we're putting towards this. And the reason that it's being brought to you today is we worked really hard this last few days, and we went to the TDHCA, and we got some good news. And it's really two pieces of good news. In talking to the TDHCA, we were very concerned, I brought it before, because we have to place in service. It means you have to have the tax credits in place by December of the following year. And we're bringing this to the board in a very short time frame. But there's been a lot of concern across Texas with construction prices. They had gone up tremendously, and so people have had gaps. And so in talking with our tax credit consultants and actually Bobby Wilkinson of the TDHCA, who's the president, he said a lot of folks are asking for a force majeure. And what that allows us to do is it gives us a little bit more time to place in service, and it says, hey, listen, the prices are going up. We think we can close this deal, but we need a little more time to put it in service. And so we're going to go next month to the board and ask for a little bit of time on the back end. So we're not under the strict deadlines or the tight deadlines. So we have a little more time. But also during those conversations, we learned that there's some National Housing Trust Fund money that will become available. And because of the number of 30% units, we believe we will qualify for about $3.5 million. And when those trust funds have become COVID relief funds, so it's the same money but changes names. And with that, if we're able to get that whole $3.5 million, that would reduce the amount of cash that we have to put into this development. And, that would be helpful for an organization, and it's a 0.5% interest, so it's a very low interest rate as well. So it's not free money, but pretty close, right? And so what I'm asking for today is approval of the same transaction that I presented at the committee meeting. In other words, approve the transaction. And what we'll be doing is going back to the TDHCA over the next couple of months to apply, because the notice of funding availability isn't released yet, but we're going to delay the closing until we get this $3.5 million or whatever number they end up giving us. And also doing this force majeure I mentioned, so our place in service date is not so tight. Because right now we only have 2 months leeway from the time it takes Franklin, who's our developer, to start the construction and to his projected finish time. But as you all know, with construction projects, that is very close. And we're at risk if we don't meet that deadline. So in talking with the president of TDHCA, he's very confident that we will get that extension. And so we're going to ask for that extension. And that will essentially give us plenty of time with the extension. And also give the additional funding will make this a little more palatable too from the financial side, because if we don't have to put all of our own cash into it, it's better. And that's it. So we'd ask for approval of this transaction, and in probably the next 60 to 90 days, we'll have the answers on those last 2 questions about the force majeure and the $3.5 million. But this is something you all should be very proud of, this development, and I'm happy that it's going forward.
I would just add, yesterday we had a conversation about this development, and everything Tim said is accurate. We're also looking at how to put even more affordability in, and so there's a possibility the 40% of public housing-like units is actually going to increase. It's still premature to commit to that because we haven't run all the numbers, but we're looking at that possibility as well.
That's true.
Tim, you did say this is a senior-only community?
It is.
So it's at 62 plus, or?
It is. Yeah, and it had to be, actually. For us to score as 9% tax credits, we had to make this a senior building. It happened to be the medical center, so it was a plus in that regard. So it wasn't necessarily a negative, but because of the location. But sometimes we're also looking to do family developments. But the way the scoring worked this last round, for us to get the max amount of points, it had to be a senior development.
I kind of like it. Looks like there's a walking path for the residents.
Yeah, I
in
should
the
have
back
mentioned
part
that.
and
I did that at the
everything.
last meeting. That is an area we cannot build because it's a floodplain. There's a little dry creek back there. And so we're putting I think, gazebo and some hiking bike trails. And I think if you actually follow all the way around, the rain's not in here, but I think it's a half mile, or is it a mile? It's a half mile around that project. The other thing that's neat about this, your typical 9% development is only about 80 units. And with the funding we're putting into this, we're able to put in more units. And the site that we already own, would allow this number of units. But oftentimes, because of the amount of tax credits you get, you don't maximize the value of the land. But because we own it, we're getting all the developer feedback. We're making some cash back on this as well. And we're able to put that back towards the development so we can do more deeply affordable units. So you have to have a swimming pool. We looked at the value engineering if we could cut this, but there's actually a Minnie's checklist and of things. The hot tub is no longer there. Except there was a hot tub. There actually was a hot tub, but we actually went through some value engineering here, and the hot tub's gone, so that's an old picture already. But the pool does have to stay, and so if you have a friend, you can come.
I will tell you for senior citizens.
Okay. Well, good. I was guessing you didn't like it, but you actually do like it. Okay, good.
I'd like to make a motion to approve.
Second?
Second.
I'll second.
All those in favor say aye.
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 All those against, same sign. Motion passed. Tim, I have a question on, the bond passed. And in that city bond, I think that we have talked with the city and we believe that there will be some monies that the city will be allocating to us. And I think it would be a good idea for us to set up a meeting and really look at ourselves very strictly and say, how much could we do if they would give us X? Because I really do think that we have been able to develop a better relationship with the city that trusts us. And I think that given what we have seen, we really are the organization that will work with 30% and less. And that's what we can bring to them, is that. And so I think getting ready, requesting a meeting with them, and then us being able to start planning in the future, given what we have already, and then given the future, I think now is the time to do it.
Yes, and I am meeting regularly with the city, and the Department of Neighborhood Services is going to be responsible for administering these funds. So they're in the process of coming up with their proposed methodology for distribution. It's going to include some sort of a RFP or scoring process because they feel like they just can't give it to one
They have to.
organization.
These are federal funds.
Right. So they're in the process of defining that, and we will definitely have input into that process, as will the city council. I think that we have spent a lot of time talking to the city and others about income-based housing to emphasize the importance of Saha's wait list versus 30% units,
Yes.
which will never be able to assist a family that's in the $9,000 or $10,000
Right.
range. So they seem to understand the issue, so we'll continue those discussions. I think it's a good point you bring up, Dr. Guzman. We'll continue
Thank you.
talking with them about it.
Yes, I think that the more that we are able to represent the neediest, the better we will be at fulfilling our mission.
Right, and in June, Tim and I actually have a presentation to the Neighborhood Development, the City Council Development Committee, which I think has 4 members, or 4 members, I believe.
For city council members,
Yeah.
for sure.
And so we will certainly raise the topic again at that meeting.
Okay, thank you.
And I just want to add on one thing to what you mentioned. You said the 0 to 30% AMI. You know, as Ed mentioned, you know, a lot of the tax credit units, they can't afford the 0 to 30% AMI. And like developments like this, where it's 0 to 15% AMI, bar none, there's not anybody else in the city that's doing those. And as the presentation you saw, I get the number wrong here, but 60-something thousand people on our wait list and nobody is serving. And so when you talk to the city and you have those, you know, elevator speeches, that's what's important to realize is what do y'all do that's different? And the 0 to 15% AMI is what we're doing different that nobody else is.
Yeah, that's our sweet spot. That's what we understand, and that is our mission. The other one is what was brought up in childcare. I think for next meeting, I think we need to look at other housing organizations and see what their role is in childcare, and maybe for next year establish some sort of goal. You have 2 women right now, but there's a third one missing on the board, and we all had children, and we all went through the nightmare of working with children. And I think the more supportive that we can be for our tenants to be able to get training and to be able to get jobs, the better the city will be. And so I think that should enter into our goal planning in some way.
Okay, thank you.
Discussions. 18, Discussion regarding resident concerns. We heard from residents already.
some.
Are there?
I have some concerns.
Okay.
Brandy, what is the name of that security company?
Lawmen are the two that
Texas
we
Lawmen.
use.
Ed, I would like to ask that we review Texas Lawman's contract. I was moving 2 weeks ago from Parkview to another property. I understand that the property was under fire watch. My moving truck got there. I got there also. I know we don't park on red curbs, but it was the only place that the moving truck could park on. And I parked, and I was just going to unload some things that I had in my vehicle and move them inside the door, which was right there on the back side of the building, and move my car into a parking space. The security guard that was there approached me and says, "You cannot park there." I said, "I understand, sir. I'm going to unload my stuff and put it inside and move my vehicle." He proceeded to keep telling me I couldn't park there. I said, "Sir, I'm just going to unload my stuff and then I'll move it." Well, I finally gave in and said, I'll go ahead and move it and move my stuff from further away. Before I decided to move the car, he threatened to call the police if I didn't move immediately and have me arrested. I know of no law that if you park on a red curb that you will be arrested. You can be ticketed, or if you're not with your vehicle can be towed. I was livid and angry, and I called Brandy, and I apologized. I called her later and apologized to her for doing that, but no resident should be treated that way by the security that's there. And it just happened to me, and I sit in this chair, and I can speak up about it and be vocal. You all don't know about this stuff. Maybe I should have called Ed, because I'm not supposed to actually talk to Brandy about these items, because we don't deal in operation. But we can review the contracts as a board. And I would like to review their contract because, and Brandy told him, you do not talk to our residents that way, and thank you for that. But, and, you know, it was a stressful day for me, you know, on top of that. Where I was moving from, there was only one elevator in operation. I was on the 14th floor. Took them 5 hours to get me out of there, which should have only taken maybe 2. Because the elevator doors, you can't keep them open very long because it will cut the elevator off, and then maintenance has to come and restart it, and we're sitting there without an elevator. It costed me almost $1,000 to move, which should have just costed me $400 to $500 because of one elevator. It would have been nice if there's something in place that we can have a key to turn the door off while we put the stuff in the elevator, and then turn it back on and leave it on so people can use it as they want to, because we would only be able to put 2 or 3 items on and the doors would close. One time we were and I was helping them to try to get done, and one time the elevator closed and my stuff went down and came back up because the elevator was called somewhere else. You know, these are things that residents shouldn't have to go through when they're moving. It's stressful enough. I do want to say that I'm very happy where I'm at now. Brandy hasn't heard from me in a while since then. But we need to work on these things. And also, my next question is, do we only have the contract with Otis Elevators now, or do we still have it with Schindler?
So we have, Currently, it is, we have 2 contracts, but for our public housing communities, it is with Otis. I will tell you, Commissioner, this is not a unique thing right now. It is supply chain issues that any elevator company will be dealing with in the city or across the country. So I know there's been a lot of comparisons between the 2 different contractors, even with my maintenance staff, but I think we're all forgetting that a lot of these things are due to supply chain issues, and I just want to be, my folks, as well as the board, be mindful that we know what is happening, and, you know, the only thing I can say is with the vendors is making sure they're communicating that, so we can properly get that information out to our residents, but we know there's a lot of challenges, so I'm trying to be mindful of everything that all of our contractors, not just our elevator contracts, are going through, a lot of our contracts, as well as what we go through. I'm trying to remind our team that there's a lot of things that we can't get our hands on because of supply chain. So that is some of the situations we're dealing with right now.
Okay, I just wanted to ask that because I've received calls from some of the residents
Absolutely.
at Parkview, and they're frustrated, and I understand.
And I'm fielding those
that-
calls as well, and I understand, you know, I'm trying to, you know, again, it's about communication, and that's what I'm reminding our contractors about, but I'm also mindful that some of the things are outside of all of our controls right now.
Maybe if the property managers of this office can post something or let the residents know
Sure,
that.
absolutely.
What the issue is and why, and that it is being worked on, so they
Yeah.
know why. And
Yeah.
just say it's because of supply issues or whatever, you know, maybe. At least they hear from staff that they are working on it.
Yeah, I'll make sure they do that, because that's what we've been trying to make sure, even if we know it's down for an extended period of time, we're trying to make sure we get that communication out, so I'll remind them.
Okay.
And Commissioner, on the other issue, absolutely, our contractors should be respectful to all residents, you know, regardless of the position they have. And we can follow up with that and make sure that they understand that that type of behavior is not acceptable. And also, we can certainly send you a copy of the contract. We'd be happy to do that.
Okay. Because I never know who they're talking to.
I'm just surprised that a 14-story building would only have 1 elevator.
It does not, Dr. Guzman, it actually has 2, but we have 1 down for maintenance, and so that is the supply chain issue. It is back up, but we had to have some ropes replaced, and so when they're not local, they have to get it from other places, and so there are delays, but for safety issues, we cannot continue to have elevators going up and down if we know that there is something that needs to be replaced.
Okay, so there are 2 elevators.
There are 2 elevators, yes, ma'am.
Okay.
I think the new building you're in has 2 elevators plus a freight, or?
No,
2 elevators?
One's a freight elevator.
Okay, got it.
Which was down for a week or so before. That's why that elevator wasn't operational, but.
Okay.
And I know I've seen them out there checking it to make sure everything.
We don't have any additional items under resident concerns.
Thank you. So onwards, we go to the president's report.
Can I get discussion?
Oh, discussion.
Resident concerns? I have
Yep.
tonight. A while back, Tim was kind enough to give me a tour of the
Got it?
the tour of the Hemesview. And at the time, as you know, I live down the street from there. So at the time, I asked him, what's going to happen, or where did the Y go, the YWCA that was in the corner, which is bringing me to that lady that was kind of upset. And so, and he said, well, I'm not sure, I don't know what, you know, we discussed them moving for quite a while. They knew they had to leave, you know, for quite a while before that happened. So I don't understand why. Where did the YW go? Does anybody know? I mean, was there somebody that could?
They're still located in the building. They were notified about 2 years ago that they were going to have to transition out, is the way I understand it.
That's what I thought. That's what I recall. And so apparently, the Y never told their clientele
That's,
where they were going.
That's correct. They didn't notify their clientele until very late in the process, and much of the concern is because they did not notify the families.
And that's been a while already, hasn't it?
Yeah, so it was, and I don't have my timeline right in front of me, but a little bit of history. 2 years ago was the first conversations we had with the YMCA, and one of the reasons we were looking at that site was because at that point in time, there was 2 families that were in that property that were our residents. And since that time, it has risen to 5 for full disclosure, but because over time, people leave and they go, but there's 5 families. And so what we told them was they have the opportunity, if they would like, to relocate into one of our new buildings, the multifamilies. Buildings, if they like. The rent would be different because the rent was like $1 a year. The YMCA does have other properties within 2 miles of that particular location. And so the Y has been working with the families and letting them know, if Lorraine's not in here anymore, but I think that it was 45 days ago or 30 days ago that they sent out a letter letting them know that in August that they would be relocating, that it would be shutting down, and they were giving them options at other daycares. Some of the challenges we had was, we had the multifamily developments where we could potentially build and potentially put the YMCA. As we went through the zoning, and by the way, I want to say this as well, we sent out over 11,000 postcards to everyone in King William, Lavaca, the homes, and we had community meetings. And we discussed all of Victoria Commons, and which included the YMCA. We did get some comments say, it's a shame that's going, but there was no, don't do it. So the first indication we had that someone was actually angry about this was, and if I'm going too long, sorry, but was whenever one of the families that was there, and they got the notice, and then they called the news media and said, hey, I'm not happy about this situation. And then once it made the news, we had some other families or people that were former residents, like Maureen Galindo, who has spoken. But it was actually somewhat of a surprise to us because we had gone through zoning, we'd gone through city council, and we went through all that, and there wasn't any pushback. And then at the very end with that news story, it flipped on a dime that there was a small percentage. But if we reached out to Lavaca Neighborhood Association, who provide the letter of support, and the Lee Street Homeowners Association that has a letter of support for this, and the greater community, everyone was on board. So it was a minority group of people that spoke up. And to be honest, it was a surprise because we had all these meetings for 2 years and we heard nothing. And so what we've done now is as we're going through the process actually the YMCA is going through the process, the 5 families that our residents were working with, but the ones that are not our residents, the YMCA is working directly with, is that they're trying to find where's other places they can be. And so what that is doing, because we have a timeline that we have to get things done, one of the things that the neighborhood required was that we put in a new road that goes near the park, and that actually does impact the YMCA. So we have to build, because the neighborhood of commitments, the road first, which means we have to tear down the YMCA earlier than was originally anticipated. Because the YMCA, we had to build the road before we do anything else, which is before we build the multifamily. Well, that means you're going to knock down the YMCA before all that. So that as you go through the sequence of events, there's impacts to some of the negotiation. And we didn't think it was that big of a deal, but they said, listen, before you do anything, we're worried about traffic. We want this new road to be put in. So we agreed to that, but because it impacts the YMCA, that has to go at an earlier date now. So that was perhaps a longer answer to that question, but that's how we got here.
I think I would just add that I believe D1, Council, District D1, is also supportive of this effort.
Okay, so.
And he was at those meetings too, and so.
This lady didn't get the memo, I guess.
So I can say she got the postcard.
Thank you.
So we have the president's report then. I don't like to talk about myself, but
you will.
It's the first item here. So I actually, Saha has received an award for the NARO Hall of Fame. So I've been inducted to the Texas NARO Hall of Fame. And this award is for compassionate leadership during COVID, and particularly extending the rent moratorium, the eviction moratorium for our residents. And so we're very proud to have that and to get that. And today I received a little plaque in my office that I'll have to find a place to hang. So that is the first item.
Congratulations.
Thank you,
Absolutely.
thank you. It's really the organization, and of course, the board has been very supportive and leading the way in these efforts. We have the Arcadian, which is affordable housing with the NRP group. It's in East San Antonio, and it's 324 units, ranging in income from 30% to 70% units, and this is located at 1604 and I-10 East. So we're very proud to announce the opening of this particular property. And then I had the opportunity to attend Mother's Day, and it was the Saha sponsored Mother's Day for our mothers, and it was really exciting to see everybody. We had mariachis there, and so there was singing and dancing, and we had clothes donated for our residents, and there was various organizations there providing access to health services and different things of that sort. So it was a nice morning, Friday morning, and we hadn't done this in 2 years because of COVID, so it was nice to get everybody back together again for this event. And so that will conclude the president's report for today. And I know we're going to go into closed session.
Right, we still have 3 nonprofit meetings, so perhaps we should take those first. The Las Varas, the Public Facility and Public Finance Corporation meetings.
That would be fine.
So you should have before you, I think, the written
Yes,
versions.
we have the information.
So whenever you're ready, ma'am. You're just going to recess the current meeting and begin those meetings.
Mhm. We now recess the board meeting, and we will go into the Las Varas Public Facility Corporation board meeting. Who is chairing that?
You.
Oh. Muriel laughs. The Board of Directors may hold a closed meeting pursuant to Texas Government 551071076 for consultation concerning attorney-client matters, real estate litigation, personnel, and security matter. The board reserves the right to enter into closed meeting at any time during the course of this meeting. Do we have any public comment for this section?
No, ma'am, we do not.
Joanna? None? Okay, hearing none. Do I hear for approval of the minutes of May 4th?
So moved.
Is there a second? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those against, same sign. Onwards to the consent items, which is from 4 through 7. Do I hear a motion?
I make a motion that we approve consent items 4 through 7.
I second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those against, same sign. Motion passes. Onwards, we go to the San Antonio Housing Facility Corporation Board meeting. Yes, we will adjourn the previous meeting and go on to the Housing Facility Corporation. I will call the meeting to order. Is there a public comment, Joanna?
No, ma'am, there's not.
Okay. Do I hear a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those against, same sign. Motion passes. In the consent items, it's consent item 4 and 5. We've seen those before, we've
Yeah.
listened to it.
Correct. I'll make a motion that we approve consent item 4 and 5.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those against, same sign. We will go ahead and conclude the the Housing Facility Corporation Board meeting and go on to the Housing Finance Corporation Board meeting. We will call the meeting to order. Is there any public comment, Joanna?
No, ma'am.
Do I hear a motion for the minutes of February 4th?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those against, same sign. The consent item in this is for
I'll make a
an
motion.
adjournment.
Yeah, I'll make a motion for the consent item to be approved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those against, same sign. Item passes. And then we get to adjournment. Which
And now,
then,
so then we can
we go on
reconvene?
to closed session,
Yes, ma'am. So with your permission, I'll go ahead and read the items for closed session.
okay?
The board will be convening in closed session to consult with its attorney regarding the Board of Commissioner roles and responsibilities under Texas Government Code Section 551.071, and the board will also be discussing personnel and consulting with its attorney under Sections 551.074 and 551.071 regarding the approval of the President and CEO goals for 2022 through 2023. The time is 2:58.
And before we actually go into the other room, there's a brief announcement. We have 2 birthdays. We have our board chair, Dr. Guzman, who has a birthday in June, and we also have Commissioner Lopez, who has a birthday in June. And we have a tradition of a few goodies for everyone, but also the tradition is that Muriel leads us in a birthday song. Birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, Dr. Guzman and Commissioner Lopez. Happy birthday to you.
Imagine 2 Geminis. Two Geminis. Oh, yeah. They're twins.
Recording stopped.
We here, we go into the next room?
We go on to the other one?
Yes.
Okay.